between the people that I was speaking to on that podcast mixed with the type of communities that I had found online and just kind of seeing the model of like other people who were doing the things that I wanted to be doing and kind of saying to myself like, well, why not me? Like if they're doing it, what's the secret? Oh wait, there isn't one. They're literally just doing it. So why not give it a shot?
Welcome to Kindred Spirits, the podcast that brings you unfiltered conversations about life, work, and everything in between.
Join us as we share stories, spark connections, and celebrate the magic that happens when kindred spirits unite.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Kindred Spirits podcast. Today we are speaking with Danielle Ryan. Danielle is a content creator and Canadian small business specialist. With over 50,000 followers on TikTok and an explosive new YouTube channel, Danielle creates a mix of educational and commentary content online, using her platform to teach Canadians how to start and grow their own small businesses while also calling out the problematic behavior in the business coaching industry. You'll have to check out her YouTube channel to get all the juicy details on that. But in this episode, we talk all about how to grow as a content creator and some of the common mistakes Danielle sees new business owners making and how to avoid them. Hope you enjoy this fantastic episode with Danielle Ryan. Hi, Danielle. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Me too. There's so much stuff that I want to dig into with you. But let's start with the basics first. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, for sure. So my story is long, but I'll try to keep it short. I started in the realm of sort of creating content on the internet like maybe 8 years ago. I was originally in like a regular 9 to 5 government job. And quite frankly, I was pretty bored at that time. So I thought to myself, like, how can I make this a little bit more interesting? And I actually decided to start my own podcast. So
Oh.
I used to have a podcast for about 5 years. I had it. It was called Adulting 101. And at that time, I was in my early 20s. And it was really just about like navigating the world of adulthood as a millennial, trying to figure out, career, life, all of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of like my passion project outside of my job. And then flash forward about a year and a half later, I was really sort of unhappy in that career. And the way that government jobs are structured, there's a lot of like union bureaucracy, that kind of thing. And I just felt like I was never going to get to a position that I wanted to be in. And so I had decided that it was time for me to kind of quit that job and just like go ahead and start a business, which sounds like a pretty big kind of jump. But at that time, I was consuming a lot of content online. I was talking with other creatives, kind of learning how they had done the same. And so I ended up leaving that job in 2018 and opened my own yoga studio. This was in Ontario. And I basically built this business where I was offering mobile yoga services to people without having to own like an actual studio space. And I essentially built that whole business and all of my clientele through social media, specifically like Instagram and Facebook at that time. And so through that process, that business started to grow. I eventually purchased a home, converted part of the house into a physical studio space. I was still doing mobile services, all of that good stuff. And then the pandemic came. So as we all know, any business that's like an in-person service, we had to get creative with how we were delivering those services. And I essentially transitioned all of it online. I then at that time, this is when like TikTok was taking off. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to kind of show people the behind the scenes of running this business on TikTok? And I just started documenting my journey as a business owner, which naturally attracted people. People started asking questions. And I sort of fell accidentally into this niche of teaching Canadians how to start and run businesses. So kind of to summarize all of that, a lot of things happened in my personal life. And long story short, I ended up moving across the country last spring, closed down my yoga business, and transitioned full time into a mix of creating content as well as advising brands and startups on how to use social media for their businesses. So now I do like freelance content creation. I do my own content creation. I have a YouTube channel and kind of just a talking head on the internet. So
Wow, what a journey. Do you think that when you were doing your podcast, chatting with those guests and learning from them is what gave you the confidence to go out on your own in the first place?
Partly, yeah. I would say it was between the people that I was speaking to on that podcast mixed with the type of communities that I had found online and just kind of seeing the model of like other people who were doing the things that I wanted to be doing and kind of saying to myself like, well, why not me? Like if they're doing it, what's the secret? Oh wait, there isn't one. They're literally just doing it. So why
Hmm.
not give it a shot?
Yeah, I love that. So, in your journey when you started becoming more of a content creator, what were the things that really helped you to grow and to keep continuing forward on that path?
I think honestly, and I even like roll my eyes at myself when people ask me this and I answer, it's like, it's very simple. I think a lot of the times we overcomplicate what it takes to become a content creator, whether you're going to do it as your full time job or just like as a hobby that you do on the side. It ultimately really just comes down to being consistent in whatever it is you're choosing to make content about. And I say this because I think, and I see this a lot with clients that I work with now, is people are like, okay, I'm going to start a TikTok where I'm going to share whatever hair and beauty tips. And they show up for 2 weeks and they only get 10 followers. And they're like,
Hmm.
well, this isn't working. I'm going to quit.
Yeah.
Okay, only give yourself 2 weeks. You can't have the expectation that people are going to find you in that time. For example, I started a YouTube channel last July and it took me almost a year to reach 1,000 subs. But prior to that, like that was because I had a video go viral as an aside. But prior to that, I was gaining maybe 2 new subscribers a day. So I was building
Mhm.
a YouTube channel for 8 months and like 200 people were watching my videos. Like it takes consistency over time, and then beyond
Mhm.
that, it's like actually paying attention to the data from an analytical perspective. You're creating content and you're analyzing, what are the videos people are actually watching? What are the ones that maybe I thought were a good idea, but they just flat out aren't hitting? And then doubling down on the content that works.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, and I have to ask, and I know this is always like a number one question when people are talking about content creation. Do you feel like you had a certain niche that you stuck to at the beginning? I know your journey, you started with yoga and then now you've ended up sort of doing the Canadian business tips and stuff like that. So, would you recommend to somebody to go all in on one niche and one topic when they're starting to build their platform? Or do you think it's okay to have different things you want to talk about and be multi-passionate online and still be able to grow that way?
So this is an interesting question, and I think that there's a lot of conflicting advice and opinions about this. In my opinion, based on my own experience, I do think that having a niche is really important. And that's not to say that like I can only show up and talk about taxes in your small business. You can pick a like somewhat broader niche and then kind
Mhm.
of break it down into what I would call like your content pillars. So if I think back to my yoga studio, I wasn't only talking about yoga. I had like my yoga studio was kind of like the overarching niche, but then beyond that I had the content pillars of meditation, yoga, self care, and like a journaling practice. And then I would
Mhm.
use those 4 subjects to kind of create my content around. And so I think you can use that model in pretty much any niche. But obviously, there's going to be people out there that say, like, you can be your niche, share all your interests. But I think really in the beginning, the reality is like, no one cares about you. They don't know who you are. They don't know what you talk about. So you need to give them a reason to care about you. And the way you can do that is by building authority in one specific space and then naturally letting it grow from there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, outside of niche selection and consistency, are there any other tips that you've found to be really helpful to either help grow or help stay consistent along the social media journey?
Yeah, I guess a big piece is not being afraid to experiment. I think a lot of the times we tend to get stuck in like, well, this is what has always worked for me. But then I don't know if anyone listening to this is on TikTok recently, you might be someone like me who used to get, 50K views on a video and now you can't even break 300. And it's like, okay, well, what's happening? I need
Hmm.
to start experimenting with maybe it's different editing styles, different ways that I deliver my content, trying to make it fun again. Because if we're so focused on trying to build this social media following, we're not gaining traction, it can be really discouraging. So thinking of ways of like, how can I approach this differently, try something new, and then again refer back to those analytics and see like what's actually hitting.
Yeah, I love that idea of making it fun. I feel like that's so important in business in general to have that reminder
100%.
in the back of your mind.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I
Exactly.
can speak on that. I'm not a TikToker, but sometimes I try to be, and you're right. Like some days my videos will hit crazy amounts for something so ridiculously like something I wouldn't think about, but other ones you like think and plan, you're just like, what is happening, right?
I swear
Um,
it's always the ones where I'm, like, laying in my bed. I'm like, "I just woke up and here's some random fact," and it's like, "Okay, here's 20,000 views." Meanwhile, I'm, like, professional in my office, and it's like, nobody wants to see that."
100%. And it's funny, I was one day I was walking when I was being dramatic and I just was like, you guys have something so crazy to tell you. And it was about a hair clip or something like that. It got like 10,000 views because I made it so dramatic at beginning
It's
to
so
make it about a hair
ridiculous.
clip. So when to speak on that though, I'm so curious because again, we've interviewed so many people in the podcast about entrepreneurship and businesses and the social media. You mentioned TikTok, but what I'm curious about what you, in your opinion, what the trends are for the platforms. Because I know in the past I've heard Facebook is going down, but now it's coming back up. Like, do you just kind of um, do your research on which ones you believe are the most important? Or do you believe that you should kind of have your toe in each one?
Okay, so this is like a very common question that I get, and I think it's really a good one because a lot of business owners don't have time, right? Like we're trying to run our business, we don't have time to be a content creator, right? So the ultimate answer that I always go back to is so fundamental in business in general, and it's really just understanding like who is your target market, who is that ideal client, but more importantly, where are they spending their time? Because if I'm marketing to, let's say, the demographic of my parents and I'm spending all my time making these funny TikTok videos, my dad isn't spending any time on TikTok. He's on Facebook, right? So it's like, if that's my target market, I need to figure out what kind of content they're consuming and I need to show up on Facebook and deliver these Facebook posts. So ultimately, it's like, it's not so much about following what's trendy, what apps are popular. It's like, who is the person I'm trying to sell to? What are their problems? And where are they going to seek the solution to that problem? Because for some people, it might be LinkedIn. For somebody else, it might be Instagram. So, kind of figuring that out and focusing more on gaining traction in one space, especially if you're in the sort of infancy of your business. And then once you've gained relative success, however you're measuring that, in that specific area, you can then move on to, maybe starting on Instagram or starting on Facebook. So it's ultimately like less is more in the beginning. And then once you've kind of cracked that code, that's when you can have time to sort of spread yourself out versus trying to do everything all at once. Again, I think that's going to be what leads you to burnout ultimately.
Mhm.
Good. Yeah, very true. My mom is obsessed with Facebook.
Yeah.
Obsessed. She's always sending me things like, look at this, it's a dog. I'm like, great.
I saw that on Instagram 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And TikTok 2 weeks before that.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, yeah.
exactly.
I'm fully admit I'm a TikTok junkie. I am on that platform like
Me
crazy. But
too.
that's really good advice, and I
Me
think
too.
that's super important too because people, and not to go on this a long way, especially starting your business, you get a little bit um, consumed with almost like not trying to procrastinate, but trying to do too much, as you just mentioned, and that turns out to be burnout because you get so involved in something and you just and then social media is like a love and hate thing, right? They love you one day and they hate you the other day. So
And I think it's really hard to successfully gain traction if you're trying to do it because you're likely not doing it well if you're, especially if you're not really well versed in the world of content creation. It can be a pretty steep learning curve. So if I'm like making these mediocre videos and I'm putting them on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, I would be better off just focusing my energy on one of those three and doing it really well. And that's going to be, again, what gains you that traction to then be able to kind of figure out the other platforms. But I just always advise people like less is more. If you can stay consistent in one space, that's going to prove more fruitful than trying to like be okay everywhere.
Mhm, mhm. What are some of the other places where you see new business owners focusing their efforts in sort of the wrong areas that don't actually help them build their business, where they're not quite
Yeah.
moving the needle?
So I can speak from my own experience. When I had my yoga studio, I hired a graphic designer. Again, this was kind of like before Canva was really big and you could do a lot of stuff yourself. But I hired this graphic designer who I paid over like $300 an hour to design a logo for me before I even had a single client or anyone. And it was just like such a poor allocation of resources, not only like my time, but my money, obviously, in
Mhm.
something that, like, ultimately at the end of the day, like, having a pretty logo isn't going to be the reason someone hires me as their yoga teacher, right? They're hiring me for the purpose of yoga, not how pretty the font is that I chose. So I think a lot of the times, especially in the beginning of business, we get so caught up in the like fun stuff. Like the design part is fun. Some people, like, I'm a bit of a tech nerd, so I love the like back end of building a website, that kind of stuff, when ultimately, like, the pretty fonts and the cool colors and the excellent branding aren't going to matter if your service or product sucks, right? So it's really about focusing on, again, who is this person that I'm looking to help? What is their problem? But most importantly, what is the perfect solution that I have for them? And how can I show up in a way and present that? Like, you should really be focusing on that, especially in the beginning, because without a good offer, your business is ultimately never going to grow.
I love that. And I can definitely speak this. That is the fun stuff, like making that brand and stuff, and which it's not fun. It does take still a lot of work too, right? But it's just like
Definitely.
you're right. But I'm curious to speak on that a little bit, just because it's bringing, when we're talking about this, it's bringing so many memories of stuff that I've even done personally on my own. And when you mentioned the product, I remember when this is years ago during COVID, I had to contract because of my situation, and people would ask the same thing, and they'd be like, I need a one pager of this, and this. Out of your experience, is there any one pager that someone could kind of work on when they're doing those sales calls or those connections that you found really useful? Like one pager of of rates or like what you do or anything to send out after the call?
Yeah, it depends on your business. So, if, obviously, if you're a service based business, so like for now, for example, obviously I do like freelance content creation for brands. So, I have like a 4-page PDF portfolio that I can send to people when they're inquiring. So, that includes, a little blurb about me and my background, some samples of my work, and then a general rate card of like what pricing could potentially be. I think that would work really well in pretty much any service-based industry, whether you're a photographer, a designer, a marketer, whatever kind of service you're selling. In terms of products, I don't really see how that would work, but having some kind of piece of reference, it's kind of like a digital business card, right? Where you can just give to people and send them your way. And I guess, just as an aside or like add on to that, I do a lot of workshops with not for profits, teaching women how to build businesses. And I was in a presentation recently where I was teaching them the power of not just relying on social media when it comes to building your business. So I think in the age that we live in, if I have a problem, I'm going on Google and I'm asking Google how to fix my problem. So my toilet is leaking. I'm going on Google and looking like plumber Vancouver, and I'm going to pick whatever guy comes up first that has decent reviews, right? So I think as a business owner, we get so focused on, building a pretty Instagram feed and making TikTok videos, but we need to have a space beyond that on the internet that people can find us, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, Google search is going to rank number one. So it's like, not saying everyone needs to build an entire website. I don't even have a full website now. I have a one pager, a one-page landing page that explains who I am, has links to all my social media, my email contact, and then like a link to my media kit, and that's it. It's like, it doesn't have to be super complicated or super expensive. You don't need to spend a bunch of time and money building this thing. But if I search you on Google, I want to make sure that you're showing up, because otherwise, how are people going to find you?
Mm-hmm. On that note, if somebody is a new business and they're exploring different marketing channels, what do you recommend? Like, would you say they might want to look into doing Google Ads or other forms of marketing outside of social media that somebody new would want to give a try?
For sure. So I think that in terms of ad spend, it's never worth it to spend money on ads until you've proven that the offer that you're selling actually sells. I know I made this mistake in my first business because I hired a mentor who was telling me, like, yeah, just run Facebook ads before I had even signed anyone up organically into my offer. And it's like, you're basically just throwing away money at that point because you haven't proven that the thing you're selling is something people actually want, right? So that's kind of ads specifically, I think, is something that kind of comes further down the line. But I
Mhm.
know a common question I get a lot is, especially with people in the infancy of their business, like they don't have a ton of money to be spending doing all these things, right? So my advice to everyone is always like, claim your channels across the internet. Even if you have no time to be posting on TikTok, get your TikTok handle and claim it as your own for later down the road when you do have the time or the team to do it for you. And like a Google business page, for example, great place to start. It's free to sign up. You, again, it'll allow you to help rank higher in search, and it costs no money and takes 5 minutes to put together. Like those are all the small things that I would say you should focus on, especially in the beginning when it comes to just like building yourself as an authority on the internet.
That.
Awesome.
Start little baby steps to grow almost a little
Exactly.
bit.
Because we think like, "Oh my god, I'm starting this business, like I have to do everything and be everywhere." And it's like, "No, like start small. Just start focusing on selling, and once you've proven
Mhm.
that like people want the thing you're selling, that's when you can focus on, building this beautiful website and figuring out a strategy for Instagram and whatever it looks like from there."
Everyone's going into the business backwards, like build the whole entire thing, and then once they're finally done, put it out into the world, only to find that maybe people don't want it. Like you said, so flipping that around and actually trying to sell something first before putting all that time into building your website and your social media and everything makes
And
a
I
lot of
honestly
sense.
think that's just the fault of like seeing other people with businesses and thinking like, "Oh, well, Danielle has a business like this. How must be how she did it." And it's like, no, I built it one person at a time.
I know social media is so bad, so good, and so like, you can't help but compare, and you can't help but dream to be in that picture
100%.
with that person that you have created this narrative for. But little do you know exactly what you mentioned for. This is a one person show that is running the wheels behind, right? But is
100%.
is there any groups that you felt when you first started out that you were pleasantly surprised that were really good support systems that you can share for people that are starting out? Any like mentorship
Honestly, at this
groups? Anything?
it's been a very long time since my like reliance on Facebook groups, which is where I kind of got started. What I've found most effectively, and like this is coming from the perspective, like I moved across the country last spring, came to Vancouver. I had literally one friend who is my partner, and I didn't know anyone else. And I basically just found networking opportunities, started meeting people. I mean, that's how we connected virtually, of course, but in the real world where people actually talk to each other, I would go to meetups and I would make friends with other creatives who were doing content creation full time. And I was asking them questions, and I was able to build this network of other people who were in, adjacent niches, but were not direct competitors. And I was able to candidly ask them questions and get feedback and learn, how much should I be charging a brand when they're reaching out to me for a sponsored post? Because my first brand deal, I charged $150, which now I look back and laugh at. But it's like when you don't know these things because you don't have anyone to ask, it's like you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's really important for people to be willing to kind of step outside their comfort zone and make those connections. Go on Google and search, small business meetup in insert city name here. And it can be really scary. I'm not someone that like likes making new friends. And so it's not like it's super easy for me to just go out there and talk to strangers, but I think that in order for you to be able to have that network and those connections, it's really important that you're willing to put yourself out there. And like you kind of suggested with the question, like those communities also exist online if you're more comfortable with that. So it's really just kind of figuring out, what works for you.
I love that. That's how Maddie and I met.
Virtually?
Yeah, we met
Oh, no way.
virtually. We ended up, I'm born and raised Vancouver, right? And I can understand. And it's funny, people are like, is it hard to make friends in Vancouver? And I'm always like, yes, yes, it is. We are very cliquey. We are but we're trying our best to expand. And I actually met Maddie from a Vancouver group that she put herself out there and I saw, and I was in this meetup Vancouver group. And that's how it came together.
That's so cool. I love that so
Yes.
much.
Yeah, no, it was funny because I've been traveling in and out of Vancouver and I love Vancouver. I don't want to insult the place I grew up in, but it is a tough market to kind of make friends and get out there, right? It's just that's the reality of it.
Definitely. I just think you need to have this like sense of willingness to put yourself out there to meet those people and make those connections.
100%, 100%.
So, one of the questions that we really like to ask our guests as a final question, the name of our podcast is Kindred Spirits. So, that is actually inspired by one of our favorite quotes, which says, "To discover a kindred spirit is to find your heart in the heart of a friend." So, our last question for you is, how do you know when you've found a kindred spirit?
Okay, first of all, I love that quote. Second of all, I would just say that to me, knowing you found a kindred spirit is really just knowing that you found someone who gets you without really having to explain yourself. I think that a valuable lesson I've come to learn over the past year and a half or so, moving out here, having to make like all new friends basically, is really just allowing myself to be intentional with the relationships that I create and finding people who are supportive of me on my journey and that I innately feel that desire to reciprocate that feeling. I think that the older I get, the more selective I've become in my friendships, and the more that I've come to learn how important it is to really be willing to give yourself and your time to people who are willing to return that to you. And so I guess I would say my kindred spirit or kindred connection would be with someone who feels the same way.
Mhm. Love that. Totally agree. Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much, Danielle, for coming on. This has been fantastic. Where can everybody find you to connect with you?
This has been so fun, and I would love to connect with people outside of this podcast. So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at It's Danielle Ryan on all platforms, or you can visit my website, which is danielleryan.me. And if anyone has any questions that came up while listening to this episode, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with resources as needed.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. This was so much fun, and I hope that we can stay connected.